Hi everyone, this is Whiteboarding 109, Illustrative Boarding and Imaginative Reading. So we're almost done with the Rookie Toolbox. In fact, next week will be our last week on it. I also want to let you know that I promised a 3-part series on PLC, and I just decided to take a little break from that and come back and finish the PLC work sessions as I finish the Rookie Toolbox. It's kind of a good ending to those. But I think it's really important when I focus on illustrative boarding that I also talk about reading instruction, and that's going to take a little bit of time today. Before I really get into reading and how this relates to that, it's important to realize that illustrative boarding is a really powerful tool that can be used in a wide variety of ways. Illustrative boarding is really an interaction. So when we think about the whiteboard cycle, we have an element and we have an interaction. And it's a specific type of interaction you can use with many different elements. For example, you could illustrate what someone's saying. So let's say the teacher's giving directions and students could illustrate that. Or the teacher is explaining something briefly. You could illustrate that. You could also illustrate any sort of text that you can imagine, and I'll show that a little bit later on. You could illustrate a series of pictures. You have a lot of pictures on the same topic and students put those together into a coherent illustration. You could also illustrate some movie clips. As students are watching it, they try to create an illustration of the entire movie on one board. One of my favorite elements for illustrative boarding would be a memory. So for example, illustrate yesterday's lesson. And students have to remember what they learned yesterday and try to illustrate it. Or at the end of the class, illustrate everything we did today and what you learned. Okay, so illustrative boarding is a powerful tool that can be developed, and the element can switch, but the interaction is the same. Now, if you ask students to illustrate, you're going to get a wide variety of answers. If you don't spend time developing this tool, here are some of the things that you could get. You'll have a student that will just draw one picture, and that's all. Or they'll spend tons of time on one picture and not develop the rest. Or there'll be a student that will only write words and won't put drawings. You get a lot of students that aren't even drawing what you're talking about or what they're reading about. They'll just simply draw pictures. So it's really important that you explain to students what your illustrations need to look like. And I've created a rubric that that helps out with this. It's just a series of 5 categories. And you don't want to develop students on the rubric all at once. It's a little daunting. So you can introduce different rubric rows throughout the school year and work on each rubric row independently. But once you put them all together, you're going to get some really powerful illustrations. But the idea really is this, that through series of feedback, of showing students what good illustration is and what it's not, you're going to improve students' illustration throughout the whole school year. The great thing about this rubric is it really spells out what good illustration looks like on a whiteboard. And so if I just kind of go through what an expert boarder should be able to do, their drawing should include all explicit objects and actions. And those are the things that are directly said, or directly seen, or directly heard. Also, the students are going to want to include some implicit objects and actions, and those are things that can be inferred. So for example, if in the text it says that they saw something outside, well, if they're inside a house, then there needs to be a window there. It might not have said window, but it's implicit that there was a window. And so students will need to include some of those as well. It's important that students label all or most of their pictures so we know what those drawings are. I mean, a lot of times students are drawing very quickly because they have a lot that they need to get in there. So it's not the quality of the drawing individually that matters, it's that they get more. And so you'll end up with blobs and you don't really know what those blobs are. So students need to use labels to describe them. Also, descriptions. There are some things that are really, really hard to make pictures out of. So like a concept. Sometimes it does require a statement or a phrase to describe what that concept is on the board. And then finally, students really need to be able to orally describe what's on their board. So if they're peer sharing with a partner, they can point to all the different pieces of their board and describe very thoroughly in their own words what their board is saying. If you take that entire rubric, you work on illustrative boarding throughout the year, you're going to get students able to use this tool really well. Way back in an earlier session, I introduced illustrative boarding. And so if we look here at this whiteboard cycle, this is kind of basically how it could be used. And this whiteboard cycle is also how I'm going to relate illustrative boarding to reading. And so when we're using this with reading, the element would be a paragraph or a chunk of text. The interaction is comprehension through visualization, really seeing it inside their head. Very important thing to point out each time. Okay, see it first, then draw it. You don't want students picturing in their head what they're going to draw. You want them seeing it and then representing it. And that's actually, it's a very important distinction. So get your students seeing it first, then illustrating it. So if I put this into the context of a classroom, this element in interaction will look something like this. You have your students labeled student A, student B in pairs. Okay, student A is going to read a chunk, a small section of text out loud, while student B listens, visualizes, and illustrates. Okay, then they're going to switch. Right? Now the same exact chunk of text, student B is going to read it out loud, student A is going to illustrate. And with this pattern, you've got half your class working on their fluency skills, and you have half your class working on their comprehension skills, and then they switch. You also have rereading in there as well, and so it helps a lot with their visual memories, which I'll talk about later on. It's a very simple pattern, but it leads to some amazing things in the classroom. And it helps circumvent some real big issues with reading I've seen throughout the years. I've observed reading in English teachers more than any other teacher. And what I've seen time and time again is that we tend to have the majority of the class sit and listen when someone is reading. So for example, one student will read out loud, the rest will sit and listen. Or the teacher will read out loud and the rest will sit and listen. Now, is it okay to have one person reading to the class? Yeah, of course. You want to mix up your illustrative boarding. And so the teacher could read out loud while the students illustrate. So realize they're not working on fluency, they're working on that visual comprehension piece. Or you could have one student reading out loud to the class while the rest illustrate. Or in teams of 4, you could have one read while 3 illustrate. So the idea here is that all students are doing something. They're either practicing fluency or comprehension. But I found that the most powerful way of doing this is having pairs where one reads and one illustrates, and then they switch. The other one rereads while the other one illustrates. And then that can also lead to some really great cooperative conversations about, I included this piece versus you included this piece, and they share, and they could do some consensus boarding where their boards have to be the same when they're done. So that's not the end of the cycle. With everything in a whiteboard cycle, there's something the teacher does during answer response, and then there's a feedback and revision. So in this particular student A, student B reading and illustrating, the teacher will be walking around giving positive feedback using that positivity feedback walk. I'll have 1 or 2 students walking around shouting out ideas for things that you could illustrate on your board. Very simple feedback, a whiteboard look, where you say, okay, you're going to add 3 new things to your board. So everyone, whiteboard look. They hold up their whiteboards. Now while they're doing that, you're going to do some teacher shout outs here in this particular cycle. So I'll say, hey, look at that, look at that, look at that. You could add that to your board. You could add that to your board. Okay, revise your board. Students put their boards down. They add 3 new details, and then they move on to the next chunk. And so this is just, general cycle. You could use tons of different tools for your feedback and revision, but that's kind of how illustrative boarding goes when it comes to chunked reading. All right, so I want to transition to my thoughts on reading. And I had noticed something in my science classrooms, that getting students to understand and know science content is not really that difficult. It just took some tricks and techniques I developed over the years, and I could get most students to learn science content. But what I had a really hard time doing was getting them to develop their literacy skills. And I noticed this going up into high school, that a student could come to my biology class and they might know tons of biology content coming in, but that same student might not be able to read very well. And those students, even though they do well in my science class, they would eventually fail their English classes and they would eventually drop out of high school. And so it wasn't the science content that was going to do it for them. It was their ability to be highly literate and understand great reading strategies. And so my 3rd and 4th year of teaching, I really sort of made this mental leap in my head to realize that the science content wasn't going to help our kids in poverty. Now, did I still teach it? Sure. But it was more covering it, because what I really cared about was the literacy and numeracy of my students. And I wanted to do everything I could to help develop that literacy and numeracy before they went on to high school, when I was a middle school teacher. And so that became my mission. My mission became to become a great applied math and applied literacy teacher. And it's applied because I would use the science content. You know, if you asked a student, does Mr. Mack teach science? Oh yeah, Mr. Mack, he's a great science teacher. But really what they didn't understand was the science content was sort of an aside to the literacy and numeracy skills. So that being said, I spent tons of time studying literacy instruction, practically in the classroom, but also I would get any book I could get my hands on about how to teach kids how to read. And I think really that is the million-dollar question for kids in poverty. Well, you know, how do we get them to read? And I don't think that we've figured this out yet. We've got great research-backed phonics programs. We can get kids to read words. But just reading a word out loud, that fluency aspect of it, doesn't necessarily mean that a kid can read well. I always wanted to know how to teach my students how to read fluently. And it's been such an honor to be able to help in an elementary school, because now I really have a rounded idea of reading instruction from K all the way up to 12, and what it is and what it isn't. And if you look at really the metacognition of reading, this is what we kind of do in most classrooms from K-12. We start young with phonemic awareness, and that's the path to fluency. So the ability to read the word cat, cat, right? Putting all that together, that's how we start. Then when students are able to phonetically figure out words, you know, they can read those words fluently. Then what we do is we ask them questions, very simple comprehension questions about what they read. So they read something like, the cat walks, and then you ask the question, what's the cat doing? And they should be able to say the cat walks. So very simple comprehension questions. Then you work your way up through the grades, and then we get to more complex questions. So a student reads a longer series of text fluently, and then we ask them something like, what's the theme of that text? Or what's the main idea of that text? So if you look at my metacognition of reading, the way I kind of view it in my head, number one is visually enhanced phonics and fluency. When they say the word cat, they see a cat in their head, and they have to prove that they see a cat in their head. And then the second step is not asking them simple questions, but it's visualization. See it in your head. You've heard a string of words, now let's see it. Now it's not just that step, there's many different components of visualization that I'm going to go through throughout the rest of this session. And then that third step, yeah, we can ask simple questions, but we do it by referring to their memory of what they visualized. So I might ask, what was the cat doing? But I'm going to do it differently, right? The cat walked. See it. Okay, now a little bit later. See it. What is the cat doing? The cat walked. That is huge. There's a big difference because I am adding the metacognitive step in there, visualization, and we can work on our ability to see things in our head. And once we've done that, then we can start to ask those more complex questions. And students will reread their text and they'll visualize it differently from a different point of view. So for example, we'll practice putting ourselves in the story as a detective, kind of looking at it from the back. Or we can visualize it through the eyes of a character. And so using those techniques, we can get our kids to be able to think more analytically and deeply about what they've seen in their head. But that's the key. The key is to work on students' visual memories. And there are many ways to do that, and I'm going to go through those now. So let me take you way back to kindergarten and CVC words and explicit phonics. That's one of a wonderful new skill I've learned in an elementary school is how to teach kids basic phonemic awareness and fluency skills. So you grab an easel and you start writing some letters down and you have students say them. So for example, you put a C down, you tap it and say sound, and then the kids say k, right? Then you tap the A, and then you say blend, ka, right? Then you write the T, sound, t. Okay, blend, cat, word, cat. That's explicit phonics in a nutshell for CVC. I mean, you get to more complicated things like nonsense words, are controlled. Then you start to work on blends. So there's definitely a lot more to explicit phonics, but I just want to kind of pick on explicit phonics for a second. You'll notice that it is devoid from visualization. Now you would hope when students say the word cat that they see a cat in their head, but for a lot of our students, they simply don't. that's not there, that connection between saying a word and seeing a word. And so I sort of have reinvented the idea of explicit phonics, and I call it visualization enhanced phonics. And I've actually done this with my daughter a lot, and it's a great strategy. So let me go through the word cat again. So I would still do the same thing, write C, sound K, write the A, sound A, blend cat, write T, sound T, blend cat, word cat. Now right next to it, I would draw a very quick eyeball, and then I tap the eyeball. I need to teach students, and they need to know that what that means is they're going to see in their head a cat. They say it, they hear it, they see it. Those two steps together, not disconnected. Now, not every single time, but a lot of the times I'll then ask a very simple question. Now, it needs to be extremely simple, something that would automatically be in their visualization. So for example, for cat, I would say, what color is the cat? Then they'll say, oh, white. Great, moving on. Okay, I don't want to ask a lot more questions. I just want to, as simple as possible, have them prove to me that they've seen something in their head. And so you can go on with sat. You tap the eyeball. Who's sitting? I'm sitting. Great. Then mat. Okay. What color is the mat? Brown. There we go. Okay, so we're getting students to say it and see it, and just a quick proving that they've actually seen it. And you don't have to have them prove every single time. Once students are good at it and you just do a sampling, that they'll visualize without having to prove it. And you see how those two steps are married together? And I know for many of you that might seem like well, that's a no-duh distinction. Kids just see things in their head anyways, and I actually disagree with that. I've watched a lot of reading instruction, and the 40% of students that are kind of looking around like this, they're not seeing anything inside their head. And that's really the difference between a lot of those students that get nothing out of on-the-rug reading and students that get a lot out of it, is seeing it in their head. And it's not that they're refusing to see it in their head. They literally don't understand that that is what they need to be doing, and they don't know how to see it well. And so working on this visual concept of connecting fluency to visualization always. You know, we're starting the car and we're learning to drive it at the same time. So you notice this takes a little bit longer. And so if I'm working on the short A sound with my visually enhanced phonics, I'm just going to do 3 words. Now the next step is a little different, and it works on our visual memories. There's one thing we know about kids in poverty, is that their ability to remember things short term is not developed well. Biologically, remembering things doesn't work well for our students that have dealt with a lot of trauma due to poverty. We've learned that one of the best things you can do for kids in poverty is to actually work on their memory. This is visually enhanced phonics, working on visual memory. Using explicit phonics, say the word cat, see it in our head. Next step, we're going to say the word sat and see it in our head. Then I'm going to go back and point to the eyeball and say, hey, what did you see? And they should be able to say cat. Great. Okay, so now I'm moving on to the next one. We say the word mat, visualize a mat. Now I go back to the first one and I say, okay, what do you see? Cat. What do you see? Sat. What do you see? Mat. And then find the last one. The words are all gone. And so now I can go through working on the visual memory. What do you see? Cat. What do you see? Sat. What do you see? Mat. And so students see those 3 things in their head, and they're working on remembering those things. And then, 3 words is a start. You could go up to 6 words and see if you can get your kids to remember, to see in their head 6 things. With Grace, we've actually gone up to 9. I can get her to see in a row 9 things. And so her visual memory is really, really well developed. That goes forward to when she reads books, she has a strong memory of what she's read in the past. And a lot of this, I think, starts with that visualization enhanced phonics. A couple extra steps. You can get kids to combine the memories, and you can add some sight words in there. So for example, I would slowly, on this board, write the word the. Okay, say it, the. Right, so that's a sight word. They should be able to say it. Then we see the word cat. Now realize at this point you would probably be using more complicated words with blends and things like that, but I'm just going simple CVC. So the word cat, they say it, they see it. Okay, the word sat, they say it, they see it. Oh, what's the cat doing? Okay, it's sitting. Okay, then the next line, we've got 2 sight words on the, and then we go to mat, they see it in their head. Okay? And so I'm getting them to see words related to each other in a sentence and visualize that together. You can also work on memory with this. So when they say the cat sat on a mat, then we go to the cat sat with a rat. Oh, what did the cat do first? See it in your head. What did the cat do second? And then don't forget, the rat also had a hat on his head. And so just like before, we'd work on the visual memory. So when you take them all away, they should be able to say, okay, what did you see first? Oh, the cat is sitting on a mat. Okay, what's second? Oh, I see the rat sitting with the cat. Okay, and then what's the last one? Oh, there's a hat on the rat. See, we're working on visualization of statements, sentences, as well as the visual memory of those sentences. And practicing this is a skill as well. So the next step that you can then take is to kind of work on that visualization. And I used to call this imaginative reading. And I think the word visualization and imagination kind of work hand in hand here. And this is something that I used to do in my science classes. And I always started teaching this using the Cat in the Hat. And I would sing it and dance to it. However, it wasn't just about this book. The Cat in the Hat is a picture book, and I'm teaching 6th graders. But we would use it to work on something that I'm going to call visual fluidity. So here we have a just one page on the Cat in the Hat. And I would sing it to my kids and dance. "Have no fear," said the cat. "I will not let you fall. I will hold you up high as I stand on a..." Now at this point I would stop and they would shout out the word ball. Okay, like no, it's not a ball. Okay, let's replace that. So working on visual fluidity, we're going to replace the ball with many other things we see in our head. And I would have my students shout out, what is he standing on? Oh, he's standing on a cat. Okay, yeah, we talked about cats before. Let's move on from that. He's standing on a firework about to go off. Oh my gosh. He's standing on a hippo on top of an elephant on top of a spider. All right, so the idea is we are changing the thing we see in our head, and the ability to do that, I call it visual fluidity. It's kind of a quick change of things we see in our head, and I believe it's a skill that you can work on with students. So you can also work on your explicit visualization. So students don't see the pictures, you don't show it to them, you read the text, and then they have to prove it to you that they're seeing what they've read. And so they can do that through cooperative learning. Student A, what did you see in your head? Student B, what did you see in your head? They could do it through whiteboarding. Okay, illustrative boarding, we're coming back to that, right? I'm gonna read the chunk, you illustrate it. Okay, but then we always point out before we illustrate the visualization, see it in your head, right? Next, you can work on implicit visualization. The cat is on a ball, but tell me about the floor, right? It doesn't say anything about the floor, but what kind of a floor is he on? Oh, well, he's on a carpet. Why? Because standard houses tend to have a carpet, so I'm inferring there's a carpet there. And then he's on that ball, so what is he doing? Is he stationary, or is he wobbling back and forth? It's not explicitly said in the text, but you have to be implicit about those things. And so you work on that sort of inferring memory based upon context, seeing things in your head that the book doesn't explicitly state, but are still there. And you can work on that as a skill as well. We also worked on visual personalization. That can really be as simple as, well, there's this ball. Well, where did that ball come from in your memory, right? Because you're seeing a ball, you don't get to see the picture, you're seeing the ball. Where did it come from? Oh, well, that's the ball that I used to play with when I was a kid. So connecting it personally to the things in our lives. And that brings me to my favorite thing that I did with my students. And so working on your visual memory for chunks of text is really important. And there's a great way to enhance it. And I always say to my students, if what you're reading is boring, that's your fault, not the book's fault. That's your fault. Like, huh, what? And we would take a page of science text and make it fun and interesting through our visualization techniques. This is really what I called imaginative reading when I started doing this, was we're gonna read a chunk and then we're gonna picture it funny, fun, real world, or media enhanced based on the things inside our head. We're gonna make something that could be really bland and turn it really exciting through our visual memories. And so here I've just got a kind of a boring, bland weathering and soil formation. And so let me demonstrate this. See if you can visualize in your head, and we're going to do imaginative reading. So I want you to see something fun, funny, real world, media enhanced. So here we go. Okay, see this in your head. Here we go. All right, this is exciting, right? Here we go. Sorry, it's hard not to lapse into teacher mode. That's just how I teach, because you create excitement through your teaching. All right. Have you noticed potholes in roadways and broken concrete in sidewalks and curbs? Okay, see it. Make it funny, make it fun. Here's what I see in my head. I see myself driving along in my car, and there's a pothole, and my car goes and there's a huge explosion. My tire blows up, and my car flips end over end, and I'm thrown out of the car, and I'm all bloody, and I see the pothole. Now, that's kind of gross, but that's okay. It's kind of gross because now I've got a visual memory of that first statement. And yeah, even though I see the bloody grossness, I also know where that came from. It came because there was a broken concrete pothole there. And now I've got this really great visually enhanced memory of the first part of this. And then we read the second sentence. When a car rolls over a pothole in the road in late winter, or when you step over a broken sidewalk, you know things aren't as solid or permanent as they look. I see an Oompa Loompa, media enhanced, walking along a sidewalk, and there's cracks that keep opening up, and he keeps falling into the cracks and falling to his death. Whenever you bring in something funny and interesting that's also media enhanced, you have a better visual memory of it as well. If you work a lot on enhancing students' visual memory using these techniques, like I said, I could literally have my students memorize a page of text. Now, yes, they might have some other information in there, like bloody car accidents and dying Oompa Loompas, but they're going to remember into the future that there's potholes and cracks in concrete, and nothing's as stable as it seems. Sometimes things tend to open up, and this is how you can start to remember lengthier text using these techniques. One of the great introductions I used to give to this was that I would have a science textbook open with something like from college, like neurobiology, and I would be reading it and laughing. And they're like, what is wrong with you, Mr. Meck? Why are you laughing? That looks like the most boring book in the world. And I'd say, if it's boring, it's your fault. And I would show them how I'm making it interesting inside my head. And we would practice this. It's just really these strong visual memory enhancement techniques that students can do. And so when you chunk the text into little statements, so you can have your students remember chunk 1 using those visual techniques, and then you go on to chunk 2. You hide chunk 1. Okay, what did you see in chunk 1? What happened? Now, let's visualize chunk 2. And as you go through the chunks, you hide one chunk at a time. And students have to remember it, and then they have to visualize the next chunk. And you can get students to really memorize longer sections of text using these techniques. Now, this is kind of where illustrated boarding comes in. You need students to prove that they're doing this. You can't just say, okay, see it, and then they see it. You really need to get them to prove it. And so illustrated boarding is one way to do this. Okay, read this chunk, see it, enhance your memory, now illustrate. Now, there's other ways to do that are a little bit faster as well. Using Kagan Cooperative Learning, you can also get kids to share this information. So for example, you could do a timed pair share. Okay, student A, what do you see in your head? 30 seconds. Or you could do a rally robin. Student A, share one thing you see. Student B, share another thing. Then back and forth and back and forth. You could add in a both record rally robin where they both have whiteboards and student A shares and student B writes and they both write it down, and then student B shares and they both write it down. So there's many ways to get kids to really prove that they're visualizing, but it's really, really important that they prove it. Don't just assume that students are seeing things in their head because they're pointing like this. And these techniques can kind of make sure that that happens. That being said, do you always have to have kids prove it? No. I mean, as you go throughout the year, this becomes something second nature to kids, and so they don't need to prove it all the time. You know, we tend to have kids prove that they've read something by answering simple questions and then harder questions. And I think that misses really that visualization step. And so if you want to ask them simple questions about what they've read, really connect it to, okay, we visualized it. Okay, see it in your head again. Now tell me about it. Now, answer this question about what you just saw in your head. Now, answer this deeper question about what you saw in your head. Adding in the visualization as a metacognitive step every single time will get across the idea that students need to see things in their head. And they can always prove what they've seen with illustrative boarding, then they erase what they illustrated, and now they can answer a question on their whiteboard about what they saw in their head. It's this beautiful sort of cycle of reading, visualizing, and answering questions. And one last thing I'm going to add to this is the idea of visual supplements. So, for example, in this particular text, we're reading about the south side of Chicago. And actually, this is a lesson I taught a couple of years ago. A lot of them had never been to the south side of Chicago, and neither have I. And so before reading the text, I would flash up a series of pictures. And the pictures would help give them some things to see inside their head as they're visualizing. There's a little bit of work that goes into getting students to be able to read this way if you're talking about harder texts that refer to things they've never seen before. If you don't show students the south side of Chicago, at least in a couple pictures, they're not going to have a lot that they can see inside their head. So it's really important that we supplement beforehand with those pictures. So here's just kind of a summary of everything I've talked about. And I want you to realize this is not exhaustive. I could probably spend hours and hours and hours and hours talking more about this topic and developing it for you. You'll notice illustrative boarding is just one way to get kids to prove they visualized, but it's not the only way. But if you're talking about the metacognition of reading, what I truly believe needs to happen for our kids to develop their literacy skills, first of all, we need to work on fluency at the exact same time we work on visualization. Bridge those two together. Never separate them. Don't let them just start the car. Have them start the car and press on the pedal. And then you work your way up to the fluency and visualization of a series of words connected. And we learn to connect our visual memory. We get a chain of word memories together. And then we work on fluency of a series of statements. You know, those chunks of text. We get a chain of memories going for that. And then, we have them prove it. We ask them to illustrate it or describe it. And I'll bring up, one more way of using whiteboards to make this happen, especially when you're reading narrative text. Give my students whiteboard stems and starters. I would do a whiteboard with I see, I hear, I smell, I taste, I touch. And while students read a chunk of text, afterwards they have to write about what they saw, what they heard, smelled, tasted, and touched. And so that's using the 5 senses to expand their memories is one way to get them to prove it. And then you get to that next step. Now it's time to ask some more complex questions. And then when students visualize it, they have to put themselves back in the story. All right, I'm a detective, I'm looking on the outside, and I'm looking at this character. What are they thinking right now? Rereading isn't about, oh, I read this and saw nothing in my head. It's about, I'm going to read it again and see it from a different perspective, and I'm going to think about what I'm seeing. And that's how we get them to answer some of those more complicated questions. There's one thing I really want to caution you against, and that is the idea of just using visualization as an activity. So we're going to do a couple activities, visualizing, and then we're going to move on. That's a lot of what reading teachers will say to me when I mention these ideas, is they'll say, oh yeah, we do visualization. We did it in September. See, the idea with this is you never leave it. It is a part of what you're doing. So that's something to really keep in mind. We're always selling the idea of see it in your head. See it in your head. Working on those skills like visual fluidity, enhancing our visualization techniques by adding some funny real world stuff in there, personalizing it, right? Seeing things connected to our own life, using implicit and explicit visualizations, and all the while proving it by using illustrative boarding. Please, give some of these techniques a try and let me know what you think. The first thing you could do is add in some student A reads while student B illustrates and switch. Because what we're used to seeing is one kid reads while the rest listen, or the teacher reads while the rest listen. You look at a classroom and about 40% of the kids, their body language is just showing you they're not seeing anything. Or, maybe the teacher's extra strict and the kid is staring at the book. Maybe they're even tracing the words with their finger. But at the end of the day, what are they really seeing in their head? Because if you ask kids a question about what was read, and only 2 raise their hand, or only 2 can shout out, you only have proof that 2 of them saw anything inside their head. That's illustrative boarding, visually enhanced reading, or imaginative reading. If you got questions, please, please, please let me know. Post them below, and I'm excited to talk to you again. Have a great week, and I will see you soon.